Professor Nita. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Luisa. Well, it is a great pleasure to introduce Michael now. I'm going to use very informal language, so that because this is a guy who flows with the world. He is going to appreciate it. Michael is director of the Institute of Study and Coherence and Emergence in the United States. That's concerned with complexity and knowledge theory. President of the American Society for Cybernetics, which is a pleasure to have not only Michael, but also we have Stuart Amplin with us, and Tom, who is Tom Smith, is Tom Fisher. Also, is there anybody else from the American?
Oh, there's lots of people. Right?
Oh, I'm glad. You can see how it's spread. I'm delighted to see that we have quite a few from the American Society for Cybernetics. Also, Michael is connected to several universities around the world. In particular, I think he is Professor of Meaning in Organization, Professor of Design and Innovation at the Tongji University in Shanghai. He's a visiting fellow at the Hull University Business School in the United Kingdom. And he's an affiliate member of the Center for Philosophy and History of Science at Boston University. So you can see he has quite a large list of associations and affiliations. Michael has been an entrepreneur, he was named as one of Wall Street's 25 smartest players in 1999. So he has connections with business, financial centers. And in 1999, as one of the 100 Americans who have most influenced how we think about money. I hope he will clarify that for us. Thank you, Michael, for being with
us. Okay, so I am your entertainment for today. This is an informal talk. You notice I'm not in a jacket and tie. All right? And I'm not going to give you a pure academic talk. This is going to be trying to relate to the real world. But when I was planning this talk, Raoul very politely said to me, you've got to talk about requisite variety. So before the actual formal talk begins, I want to make, how many people here are familiar with Ashby's principle of requisite variety? Almost everybody. Good. Now, have you thought about how requisite variety applies to Donald Trump? Do you think that Mr. Trump is exhibiting a match between the complexity of the system he's trying to control and the complexity of the controller?
No.
All right, so that mismatch is what we're talking about today. All right, and if you can understand that that mismatch is a failure of requisite variety, you will understand the academic underpinnings of what I'm about to go through with you. All right, so the talk is about the mess that we're in. And the mess is not just, gee, America elected Donald Trump, and the UK decided it was leaving Europe. The mess is a more general mess. What has happened is that we are in a world that is plagued by uncertainty and doubt. And the very things that we trust in, we've lost our sense of trust. We've lost the things that we trust in. And until we find a way of resolving that, we're going to be in this mess for a long time. So you'll notice that some things are very parallel. I put up a couple of fake newspaper headlines, but you'll notice that, the Trump-Brexit parallel is pretty good. They both are about uncertainty, they both are about doubt, and they both were big surprises. The polls clearly indicated that neither of these things were going to happen, but they did. So I've got a central theme here, and the central theme is that somehow out of all of this, we have lost or given away or repressed our ability to think critically. So it's not that we don't have it in our heads, it's that somehow we've taken this tool that we've worked so hard to develop over hundreds, if not thousands of years, and we've repressed it. We don't use it anymore. And if we did use it, I would politely suggest that things like Brexit and the election of Donald Trump, etc., might not have happened. All right, so there are two villains here. One villain is we have spent the past 50 years in what people like to call the information age. The other is us. And they come together in, we have this interesting notion that computers think in a certain way, and the mythology, starting 50-odd years ago, was that computers think like we do. Well, they don't. And instead, what has happened is that we have started thinking like computers do. And all of the things that make us human, we've given away. So we're very good at shades of gray. We're very good at ambiguity. We're very good at the idea that you could hold 2 or 3 different conflicting ideas in your head at the same time and not be paralyzed. Computers are very bad at all of those things. And they try to deal with it, and the mathematicians will tell you, well, we'll just use statistics, and we'll use probability, and that'll get around it. That isn't how any of us think. I have never met a person who actually engages in Bayes' theorem on a moment-by-moment basis. No matter what a statistician or probabilist will tell you, it just doesn't happen. You can use that as a retrospective explanation for what's happening, but it isn't what happens at the moment. That just isn't how we think. But we've taken shortcuts. The computer is great. We've got keywords. Just look something up with a word. We've got Google. We've got, where is it? These horrible devices. Now, I'll point out to you that people of my age, and that's more than half the people in this room, believe this is a device that you talk on. But if you were to show the same device to people who are in their 20s and less, they think it's a device that you use 2 thumbs to communicate with. They seem to have lost their ability to actually talk on this thing, and when you make them talk on it, they resent it. It's very strange. So, one of the things that happens with computers is that they give us some picture of reality, but I will point out to you, and I don't know how many of you can see it, but this is pictures of something called Photoshop. And one of the joys of Photoshop is you can take a picture of reality and play with it. So that the picture you see pretends to be reality. If you're very good, maybe you can figure it out, but you're not going to know that from the picture itself. So what we no longer can trust is that what we're seeing was actually what was intended to be the message. I'll put all the slides up online for people, don't worry about it. But, so, you could take something here, and then we see it one way, the artist may have intended it another way, Photoshop might have gotten in the middle, and depending on how you got it, the person that was your intermediary may have played with it. So this thing here that's the still life with a vase, etc., might have started off as a picture of Tom. And people just played with it, and it ended up as the still life of the water. There's really no way to know. So there are 3 catalysts that are at work, and I'm going to keep coming back. You'll see this slide over and over again. So the first one is that we have an excess of simplicity. We are addicted to simplifying things. And it's gone too far. The second is this idea that of black boxes. Now, I do not mean the kind from an airplane. Airplane black boxes collect everything in some period of time. I mean a logical black box. So those of you that are familiar with Randolph-Glanville know of black boxes. Those of you that do actor network theory know of a similar kind of black boxes. But the idea here is we take something and we hide all of its mechanisms, we hide all of its processes, and we just see the output or the label. and we use the label as a shortcut. And then the third one is one from this very major philosopher of the 21st century that most of you have heard of but don't recognize as a philosopher. So how many people here know the name Stephen Colbert? Only the ones from probably North America, but that's all right. Mr. Colbert was a late-night political satirist. And he had a TV show on at night. And he coined this term that I'll get to in a minute called truthiness, which is not truth. And truthiness is one of our other problems. So let me just keep going. All right. So the first is, we don't like complexity. We live in a complex world, but we hate it. So what do? We do everything we can to simplify it, because simplification is much easier. If you've been in the US, or actually I think globally, does Nike globally use "just do it" as their slogan? Is everyone familiar with the Nike slogan, "just do it"? All right, so that's simplicity. If you go shopping at a Staples in the United States, and I think there are some in Europe, Staples advertises that they have something they call the easy button.
Yes.
Another thing of simplicity. How does Google tell you to do searches? Type in a keyword. All of this is trying to deal with complexity. All right, so the second, again, is this notion of a logical black box. So inside that black box are all the mechanisms, processes, ambiguities, doubts, etc. And instead, all we do is we come up with an output, and we put a label on the output. And we see the why, and we forget about all this stuff. So the black box is our major method of simplifying things. And then we get to the fun one. Truthiness. So I don't know how many of you can read what's up there, but it doesn't really matter. What truthiness is when something feels right to you. And it doesn't have to be based on any notion of facts. Facts are irrelevant. What matters is how you feel. If it feels right, it's truthy. And I will submit to you that the current President of the United States is a man who functions almost exclusively on truthies. And if you've been watching the news over the past week or so, there's all this discussion about alternative facts and disprovable things. None of that matters. What matters is what he's feeling that moment. And by the way, the joy of truthies is you can have multiple truthies that are successively true. So if in the morning he feels that, oh, we're going to build a wall, then that's the truthy, we're going to build a wall. He goes to lunch and somebody suggests this is not really a good idea, and he thinks about it over lunch and he goes, nah, maybe we're not going to build a wall. That's the truthy. Then somebody from the news media says, but you said you were, oh, you're right, I'm going to build a wall. That's the next truthy. Truthies are easily adjusted. There's no problem. There's no such thing as an anchoring in some idea of objective fact or reality. And we have to keep coming back to that because we live in a world of truthies. So again, 3 catalysts. Now, I want you to notice what's in the middle. What these 3 things have done is kill our sense of trust. We don't know what to trust anymore. And before we blame all of this on President Trump, I will remind you that a few presidents ago in the United States, we had a president who decided to engage in an intellectual existential crisis on national TV. And he said, well, it depends on what the meaning of is. That was the start of things. All right, so we cope by simplifying. And I want to walk you through that process for a minute because it's an easy process and it helps you understand what's going on. So what we're doing is we don't want to deal with the complex world that we actually see and observe and that perturbs our brains or whatever theory of how we interact with the world you like. That's too complicated and too complex. Instead, what we do is we process that and we want to say the world is X. We want to apply a black box to the things we're dealing with. So we do that by limiting what we deal with to something simple. But the world we're dealing with is complex, so we have to construct the simplicity. First, we limit our field of attention. We draw a set of boundaries and we say, I'm only going to pay attention to this, this, and that. Right now, I'm paying attention to what's going on in the room. I'm sure there are people on the other side of that door. They don't matter. Second thing that we do is we limit the factors that are going to be considered. So at the moment, if I'm dealing with you guys, I'm dealing with you as an audience. The fact that you may be hot or cold is not my concern. The fact that you're hungry, none of that is my concern. On the other hand, if you think I'm boring you to death, that is my concern. But it all, you have to decide what things you actually are going to care about and what things you aren't. We're working our way down the sieve. Then, having made some selections, I'm going to start predicting some outcomes. Because I'm not just choosing things based on my categories, I'm choosing things based on my predictions of what the categories might do. And then finally, I pick one of those predictions and I say, oh, this one looks good. And having done that, I've narrowed down what I'm going to deal with, and I've got the simple construct that I'm now going to use. And doing that, I can go on. And it works. So let me give you some examples. So this example is labeled counterfeits, and I don't know what you can see up there. But can anyone see what these are pictures of? All right. So the story that I want to tell you is a true story, and it happened about 5 years ago in Chinatown in New York. A store was raided. And the store sold paper goods. You could buy a Gucci handbag. You could buy a Louis Vuitton handbag. You could buy a Mac computer. You could buy a Maserati if you spent enough money. Now, all of these things were made of paper. Their purpose went along with a southern Chinese cultural thing, which is that when people pass away, you burn paper offerings like this to send the spirit of the goods along with the spirit of the deceased, so they could be comforted with these goods later in life. They're called jute. Yes, there's a perfume by the same name. Don't draw any inferences. So the store was selling funereal goods. The man was arrested for selling counterfeits. So I will point out that there was a gap here. The simplification the police were using was, if it looks like something that it isn't real, and if it's labeled like something that it isn't real, it's a counterfeit, and that's forbidden. But of course, that was the whole point. You would not want to send somebody off to their whatever with some fake thing that looked fake. That wouldn't cut it. So we have a little issue problem here about simplification. Let me give you the next example. So we have fake news. How many of you know that the Pope endorsed Donald Trump? I could put up one here that said that he endorsed Hillary Clinton, because that existed too, or that he endorsed Bernie Sanders, or give me 2 minutes with Photoshop, he endorsed me. So we have this little problem, and it's going on in Europe, it's going on in the US, where because it's so easy to put something up that looks like it should be credible, it gets repeated a lot. And you don't know what to trust. Now, there are millions of people who believe this was true, that this is a truthy, because it matches their understanding of the world. There are millions of other people who are repelled by this, but they still think it happened, because it matches their view of the world. I can assure you it did not happen. So despite it being a truthy, it's not a truth. All right, and then we get this one, and this is one of my favorite stories, and I'm going to have you guys try to sort your way through this. It was the day after Christmas. It was about 6:45 in the evening at a huge mall in New Jersey. There were about 45,000 people shopping, 3,000 employees in the mall. And an argument broke out in the food court, and it was a very loud argument. And then suddenly there was a very loud, sharp noise. And somebody shouted, "Gunshot!" The next thing that happened was that the music got interrupted. You know, they're playing that nice holiday music. And instead you hear, "Attention mall shoppers. The mall is now closed. Please make your way to the nearest exit. Do not attempt to go through the mall to get to your car. Go around the mall to get to your car. This is an emergency." Now more people are screaming about gunshots. On your way out of the door, you see the SWAT team arrive. People were scared for their lives. It turns out there was never a gunshot. Some idiot had stood on a chair in the food court and it broke underneath him. So now I have to ask you, which is the truth? The gunshot or the broken chair? And your answer?
We don't know. We are not there.
Good answer.
That is an answer. All right, so if you really like that answer, so I'm going to suggest to you that for the people that were there and that ran for their lives, or that were the people that responded to the incident, that for them, that little inside group, the truth is there was a gunshot.
The perception.
Yes. And I can almost guarantee that if they were going to go tell this story in 10 years, they're going to tell their children or their grandchildren about the time they ran for their lives because there were gunshots in the mall. They're not going to tell their children, "I ran for my life because some idiot broke a chair." That just isn't the story. It isn't going to be the way it's told. But for all the rest of us, it was a broken chair. And I would like to suggest to you that both truths might have some validity, depending on who you are. And I will also suggest to you that the people in this group have a lot of trouble understanding when the people in this group say, "But it didn't happen." Because their response is going to be, "But I was there. I lived it." Their truthy was a lived truth. And that's really important. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with a 1950 movie from Japan called Rashomon. So this is an example of the Rashomon effect. There might be multiple truths that have validity depending on the context and the person that is reciting the truth. So that's your first takeaway. Part of the mess that we're in is that we decided that it was more important to learn the lesson of how to simplify according to the computer than to accept the notion of multiple truths according to Rashomon. And it was the wrong lesson to learn, folks. But it's the one we learned. All right. So whenever we go about using the black box and assigning a label, we are opening ourselves up to the possibility that others will interpret the label differently, and that the Rashomon effect will take hold. Remember, it's a black box. We don't have access to what's in there. If you don't know what's in there, then it depends on how you interpret why. Doesn't matter how I interpret it. Doesn't matter how anybody else. It matters how you interpret it. And unless we're the same people coming from the same background with the same set of beliefs in the same context, there is a possibility that we're going to make that interpretation differently. The mess that we're dealing with is that we have forgotten that. And we expect that everybody deals with it the same way we do. That's a mistake. All right, so we talk like we're always talking about the same thing. And often we're not. And not recognizing that is where you have the problem. It's fine if you do recognize it. It's not fine when you don't. So the same object, the same label, the same category can conjure up a different interpretation in different people's heads. Again, the people that were at that mall are going to tell one story about that event, and the people that weren't are going to tell a very different story. And it was the same event. Different interpretations depending on their context and background, etc. So let's take an example. Please look at this for a little bit and tell me what you see.
Face and then which or the woman.
Stare at it for a little while.
The face with the tree and the lady.
And the face.
Okay, all right. So, what did you see? Did you see a face? How many saw a face?
Second time.
How many saw the lady? How many saw both? And when you saw these things, did your mind start telling a story instantly about what was going on?
Can you go back?
Sure, I can go back. Do you not see the face?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so the point here is that meaning often depends on context. So again, let me give you a simple example. Piece of pizza on a plate in the restaurant. Looks good to eat, right? Same piece of pizza is now on a sewer grate in the street. How many are willing to eat it? My dog is still willing to eat it. My dog doesn't care about that difference in context. Try this picture and tell me what you think is the right answer. If you can't read it, it says, "Excuse me, are you smoking or are you jumping?" All right, so I need to give you, this is the academic part of the talk, sorry. I need to give you a new word for those who don't know it. You're all familiar with the notion of information, but I need you to also be familiar with the notion of exformation. Now, exformation is meaning that you derive from the environment rather than from the symbol or the representation. So let me go back to that piece of pizza. When you see it on the plate, you say, "Ah, good, it's food, it's something I want to eat." That is not triggered just by the piece of pizza, but by the context in which you find the piece of pizza. The context is the exformation. Because same piece of pizza on the sewer grate, now you don't want it. The sewer grate is the exformation. So there's a trade-off here. In order to simplify, we offload meaning into the environment. We don't deliver a book, we deliver a label. And we hope that the label conjures up the right set of information. Because if it does, then you get the meaning. But the conjuring up is conjuring up from exformation. It's not in the label. It's not in the thing that is there in front of you. It is outside it, which is why it's X, as opposed to in. And they're like a seesaw. So the meaning in exformation is from contextual clues. Now, this raises a small problem. We're all different. So how you will interpret a contextual clue may be different from how I will interpret a contextual clue. And I want to remind you of that interesting concept, truthies. Truthies are self-dependent on you. My truth may be different from your truth because I am reacting to the context differently than you are. So what feels right to me may be different than what feels right to you because of the exformation, even though we are looking at exactly the same information. All right, so this is something I actually have seen. I don't know how many of you can see it, and if you can't see it, I might ask that the lights be dimmed for a second so people can see it, because this one's important. Can you make it out or no? And then turn them back on in a minute, Tom. Thank you. All right. So I actually found this at an airport in Tashkent on my way leaving the country.
Wow.
Now, please notice that what it is. This is an airplane wing in a cloud. And what is it that they've told me on the way out the door? This did not inspire great confidence about getting on that plane. But I will assure you that they meant well, but all the exformation was wrong. You can turn the lights back up, Tom. Thank you. So again, I come back to our three catalysts and how they interplay. And again, I'm sure my trust in that airline got severely tested when I saw that poster. All right, so now I want to introduce you to the next thing, because this one is really important and explains what's going on. I call it the Chasm of Dissonance. If you are talking to people of the same background as yourself, who have the same kind of habitus, who have the same kind of background, who have been through similar contexts, then what happens is you're on this nice green line. And simplifications are very effective because they are summoning up the same exformation. On the other hand, if you're talking to complete strangers, or people who have a different context, then what happens is the simplifications are effective up to a point, and then they drop, and they go negative. Because the meaning that you want somebody to derive from the exformation, they don't get. They're pulling up a different meaning. Now, the examples of this in the US are obvious. Abortion, gun control, gay marriage, Trump versus Clinton. In Europe, Brexit. What do you do with the Italian and Greek economies with regard to the euro? What do you do with migrants? What do you do with immigrants? What do you do with Syria? All of these things evoke the chasm of dissonance. Depending on the context and where you're coming from, you will interpret information very differently because of the exformation that you're pulling up into your head. Now let me give you the classic example. And I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember this, at least half the room. In 1985, for a period of about 3 months, the Coca-Cola that Americans drank was no longer available. And this occurred because the insiders, going back to my graph, the insiders in that nice green line, which was all the Coca-Cola executives, their bottlers, etc., spent $4 million and decided that the correct degree of simplification was taste. All that mattered was taste. And when they did taste tests, Coke was losing to Pepsi. So the way you fix the Coke sales problem is you fix the taste. And they came out with New Coke. And if all that Americans cared about was taste, New Coke would have been a massive success. But I'm going to go back to that graph for a moment. That was not all that Americans cared about. And the chasm of dissonance struck, and struck very hard. Americans who drank Coke, there were many of them who identified, I'm a Coke drinker, I'm not a Pepsi drinker. There were all kinds of psychological and physiological and sociological things that went along with Coke. And when you came out with New Coke, all those things got destroyed. New Coke could not sell. And after 3 months, they gave up. It is generally regarded as the greatest marketing failure of all time. And it's because of that they were unaware of the chasm of dissonance and stepped right into it. Now, why is it a chasm? And I want to go back to this exformation problem. In the beginning here, you get noise. I mean, it's just whatever. As you simplify, what you're doing usually is you're summoning up metaphors or analogies. And metaphors and analogies are great. They help you cope. They help you understand what's going on. But we all take to them differently. To an insider, they're triggering the right kind of exformation. To an outsider, they may be triggering things that are similar to the insiders, but they may be triggering something else. And indeed, right here is where you find a lot of innovation. I say something and I evoke a metaphor, and it triggers some tangential thought in you that you wouldn't have otherwise thought of, and go, aha, great idea. Had nothing to do with what I wanted you to think about, but it was a great idea. As I keep simplifying, I go away from metaphors and I go to those black box labels. Labels work for insiders because they share the exformation. Labels don't work for everybody else because they don't share the information, the exformation. And that's how you get the chasm. So, the problem, and here's the problem. If you're in the chasm, you get people talking past one another. And depending on how deeply they're in the chasm, they may be talking past one another with really vicious emotions. The protests that we saw over the past week about President Trump were about people whose emotions were triggered by the chasm. The yelling and screaming about Brexit is emotions triggered by the chasm. So how do you recognize that you're in the chasm? When the people that you're talking to or need to depend upon start having emotional responses to what's going on, that's a good clue. The next clue happens when you say, well, wait a minute, how is this, tell me about how this works. And all you hear is, it's part of a category. So if you say, oh, Trump is a businessman, all businessmen do this. So-and-so is a liberal, all liberals do that. So-and-so is a conservative, all conservatives do that. Those are explanations in the form of a category label. You're in the chasm. They're not giving you a why, they're not giving you a how, they're not giving you any clue as to process. They're just giving you a label and saying agree with it. That's another good clue that you're in the chasm. And the final one is, well, what about context? And if they don't bother telling you that things are context dependent, and instead they just say it is, you're in the chasm for sure. Because the truth is almost everything is context dependent. And when people choose to tell you that it isn't, that means they're very committed to something that's in the chasm. So, when you're in the chasm, trying to argue with people about facts doesn't really work very well. The facts are only information, and they don't help you understand what's going on with the exformation. And the more you give them out, the more people are going to be committed to their interpretations and to their exformation. You're just going to dig your hole deeper. The only way to get out, is to figure out how to start asking questions. What you want to do is understand what's going on inside of those black boxes. And if you can get the other people to start talking about what's going on inside the black boxes, you can work your way out of the chasm. So, what do you need to ask? You want to know about how. You want to know about why. You want to know about background assumptions. You want to know about context. And if you don't ask those questions, you're going to be stuck with the labels. And the labels don't work. I mean, they work fine if you're an insider, but they don't work if you're not. So, I'm going to give you a tool. This is just a little mental trick, and it works very well. Forget about the nice 20 megapixel camera that's in here that supposedly gives you reality, and instead think about owning a broken Polaroid. The joy of a broken Polaroid is that, hang on, I think I went, there we go. Tom, can you hit the light for a minute? Is it gives you a picture that looks like that one. There's some picture of reality in there, but you've got to fill in a lot. So what you do with a picture that comes out of a broken Polaroid is you ask a bunch of questions and you try to answer them in order to fill in the picture. And if you could think about that as your mental tool for when you're in the chasm, this will help you get out of it. So what will happen as you ask those questions is you'll start telling yourself narratives that go along with the answers. And it is the narratives that you tell that will actually make all the difference. Because the narratives are the things that guide your actions and your decisions. So ask questions, think about life as if it was a broken Polaroid, tell yourself stories, and then see what happens. And at the end, because again, we're dealing with a mess, thank you.
involving presentation. So maybe there are questions? Yes. So, first one?
You said we are losing the ability to think properly.
Critically.
Correct. We are losing the ability to communicate in person. We have lost proximity. I would have liked to hear this as well. And then the question is, what can we do against this? It's not enough the two remedies you gave, this one and the one with. What can we do that people change?
One, I fully agree with you. Two, I only was given a half an hour. And three, I'm going to tell you right now that the book about this comes out in September or October. What you just asked about is a large portion of the book. Stay tuned.
Thanks, Michael. Ray Arson. I wanted to situate your talk in part of our collective history as a community of people interested in systems and cybernetics. And to say that we are partly responsible for what you've outlined, and Heinz von Forster took responsibility for that trajectory when he said that I made a semantic mistake when I substituted the word information for signal transfer. In the conversations between McCulloch and Shannon and Weaver, and the, if you like, the move away from understanding humans as people who engage in the dance of conversation, conversare, turning together. So that was the first semantic mistake which we contributed to. The second thing is that it highlights Maturana's claim that explanations arise in social relations. And the technology that we now live in has broken down the social relations that we have, out of which trust emerges and out of which the social aspect of the explainer arises in those dynamics. So that's the second point. And that then brings us to Vickers, to Geoffrey Vickers, who, reflecting on his work over time in The Art of Judgment, said, we make choices about relationship making and relationship breaking in which our standards of fact and value change.
Fully agreed, Ray. Thank you.
The third one?
Question about the last part when you say asking questions. Is this in some way that you break something or that you break the box or?
You're opening the black box.
That's when you do it in theater, they say that when you ask questions, you go to another story.
Which is exactly what you want to do. The person that is evoking a black box is saying, here's my label, this is how the world is. And if the black box is evoking the same meaning in you as it is evoking in them, you and they are going to get along fine, and you'll be able to do what you want to do. But if it's evoking a different meaning, because you have a different set of exformation that you react to the label with, you're not going to be able to develop any kind of a commonality in order to get something done unless you can break the black box open.
That means that it could be much less it's just mechanical. Sometimes you have to do procedures to get out. And the meaning comes afterwards, because you know that you have different contexts. The thing is how to get from one context to the other. And
how to be exposed
without
to both. No. You have to be exposed to both contexts, and you have to break the box.
Yeah, you have to break the box. Breaking the box is maybe you can just do it.
Yeah.
Much question maybe. First was he?
I think you really simplify Trump and Brexit people. I don't know whether you read the paper in Das magazine. In English, its title will be Big Data Hate Democracy. Both Trump and Brexit people used to run a very powerful big data corporation. And this corporation studied behavior of voters through Facebook. And in fact, there was agitation context dependent. For example, for black people, they sent information that Clinton did not give money to people on Haiti after earthquake. To gay people, they sent another information and so on. So they use your model. These guys, they are not so simple. It's not irrationality. It's maybe if you read this paper, you would maybe change your point.
No, I would argue that Trump, in his gut, understands everything I just told you. Whether he intellectually understands it, I have no idea. But in his gut, he understands it.
You in the no. You.
Okay, so maybe it's a more practical question because there is something that people cannot, I don't know if they have willingness to open the black box or they have some structural problem in opening the black box. I can open my black box and say, okay, I question everything that I believe, but this requires me to give up my job. How most of the people are kind of bounded by some structures that don't allow to go forward and open the black box.
But this is not about opening your black box.
No, people, black box. I can ask everybody to get question things in the world. For example, I don't believe that a person can be property for 8 hours for other person that asks me to do a job. It's okay. I give up my job. Everybody can give up their job. What happens next? My question is, question basic things of how society works is painful. And I bet that almost anyone would do this because they cannot, because there's structural coupling problem with everything else. And how to go to the next level, next society, like that's my question. How to make willingness of open black boxes in people, question hard questions that goes deep inside. Is it possible or?
I have no idea.
So, sorry, if you have the capability to make so short answer as Michael replied, we could go on. So.
It's just an excellent talk. It reminded me of talking about trust. There's an economic historian called Michael Polanyi, who I've come across, who said at one time, almost everything we know depends on people we trust. Starting with our families and then our whole understanding of the world. So what you're saying is terribly significant because if most of the things we know depend on people we trust, and that trust is broken, we're in a pretty parlous state.
Well, I'm going to go a little further. The fact that we have a whole lot of people, including the President of the United States, who believes that you can do something within the confines of 140 characters with 2 thumbs, and that is supposedly meaningful, is its signal that indeed the trust is broken and that we're in trouble, which is why I call it a mess.
Only the last one. If you decide to go on, Raul, what do you think?
Oh, no, I think we have to...
Yeah.
I'm around. You'll find me. I'm not going anywhere.
Sorry.
I'm not going anywhere till Sunday.
The break, we can use the break for...
How you made the relation between your concept of exformation and the aggregation of the ego, the personal ego?
Well, I'm going to come back to exformation is what gets summed up at a moment. It's what you attend to at a given moment. So I might have lots of things in my head that have collectively formed my ego. That collection is not what matters. All that matters in the evoking a meaning is the things that somehow get paid attention to. And we're humans. So the number of things that we're going to pay attention to is someplace between 5 and 9. That magic number 7 plus or minus 2. And that's it. We're not going to be paying attention to the other 30 million things that are going on in our head that formed our ego. So it's very piecemeal, and it very much depends on what it is that has grabbed the attention span of your mind.
Okay.
Thank you very much.